It's a so when we talk about drug addiction in general, and I realize we're going into a philosophical discussion now, but drug addiction is, no matter if you are still taking the drug or if you are uh, maintaining withdrawal or you're maintaining abstinence, it is a lifelong disorder. So I think that is something that we, as potentially somebody who has never had a drug addiction or a drug dependence or a substance use disorder, sometimes don't understand. I think that's something that we have to realize. But this is unrelated. It's a different topic from Kratom.
Right. And also, I think it's important for myself in having explored this topic quite deeply. It's obviously very relevant to the show here with psychedelics and psychedelic treatment. Okay, ibogaine connects with that. So then ibogaine now connects with opioid addiction. But then also, just my podcast is generally sort of like hashtag drug positive. Let's talk about all of it and let's talk about it reasonably and evidence based and without shame and whatever else. Right. So, that in all of that, there's like a real clear difference maybe to be had. They overlap, and they're often conflated. But the difference between being like physiologically dependent on a substance and being addicted to a substance, because I don't think people are addicted to methadone. They're dependent on methadone. It's not like they wake up every day and they're like, oh yeah, I really got to get my methadone. Like I need it, because it's fixing a deep emotional wound. I'm trying to escape pain, blah, blah, blah. But there's like a dependence. It's like physically, I do need it. It's not, like it's like neurobiologically, physiologically, they need that to actually face the world, where addiction can be pervasive in ways that don't have physiological dependence. Like I could have a severe addiction to shopping, and I could have a severe addiction to television watching or sex. These things I can have addictions to, and of course there's physiological components, but I'm not physiologically dependent on those things. So it's like I'm not asking you to like, I'm just bringing in this consideration of like being able to differentiate between the two, although they're often very, very overlapped, like with addiction and dependence. And then also, what causes addiction is a whole different story. That like, why do we become addicted to things? And in this sense, I lean into Gabor Mate and his sort of encapsulates it. But like, addiction is essentially like a solution that we have come up with to solve the problem of pain. It's just not a good solution, and usually just creates more pain in the long run. And his thing is like, not why the addiction, but why the pain. And then that goes back into trauma and life context, and that of course would expand into larger like socioeconomic factors and all the rest, which is related to but not necessarily the same as being physiologically dependent to a substance.
Oh yeah, and that's why I think that just treating a dependence or a substance use disorder just with pharmacotherapy is not going to be a solution. We need always a helping hand, like CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, or something to help us to actually clear the path to dig deeper. What is the underlying cause of what led us to pursue this behavioral pattern that got us into this position? Because I think there's underlying behaviors tied to it, as you said, that actually in the first place got somebody to establish this new routine, that established this new thought process potentially, or this new behavior that then connected them to. And I agree, that's what I tell learners in my classes as well, that it's not only we obviously talk often about substance use disorders, but it can be other things as well. As you said, you can be addicted to gambling, you can be addicted to shopping, you can be addicted to sex, to food. I mean, when we think about our pleasures that we enjoy or look forward to, sometimes we reward ourselves with food all the time. I know that I have a sweet tooth, and it's just how it is.
We both
Anyways,
reward ourselves with food, and we use food to suppress pain, which are,
mm,
to like they're obviously very, very related. And on top of having something like CBT or DBT or ACT or whatever it is to like help someone psychologically come to recognize like what is the root of these behaviors and how to like be aware of the mind working so as to sort of catch certain behaviors at different times to sort of, you know, realign over time. There's also a consideration of how socioeconomic factors are influencing those behaviors too. Because it's like, it's all well and good if I've got like the CBT capacity to realize that I'm just responding out of responding to a pain and an emotional pain of desperation that's present in my body by reaching to heroin. That's all fine and good, but if my desperation, my emotional, psychological desperation, is because I'm trapped up in a system like a social system that does not have any support structures or institutions to help me get out of the economic situation that I'm in, then what the hell good is any of that? Because I can't go anywhere or do anything. I'm still just like stuck in the same thing, like stuck in the same pattern, you know? So it's like, well, it's all great that you have CBT and recognize the dependence and blah, blah, blah. But if you're still living on the street, then, and there's no options for you to get a job or get because you don't have an address, and you can't get an address because you don't have a job, and there's no support structures to get you there, then it kind of leaves people trapped in that.
I completely agree. And certainly the way that this is sometimes handled is we should rethink our whole approach to thinking about substance use disorders as a society. And we have seen that other countries have made progress. When we think about Portugal, for example, as one example, especially when it comes to incarceration policies, when it comes to also treating somebody with a substance use disorder, or to maintain them integrated in society and not shun them out, to actually provide them with a network that stabilizes them, because we know from various approaches, the Vietnam War was probably the greatest example, where people who went to Vietnam and were exposed to heroin or opium, a majority of those people who were exposed to loop it back a little bit to our topic, that were taking heroin back there, where it was cheap and it was affordable to take and readily available. We thought that we had a huge crisis on our hands, that soldiers were coming back, and we would have thousands of folks addicted to heroin, but they were coming back, and they were going back into their families, into their usual social settings, and they were not staying on the drug because they were socially integrated. They were socially in their usual settings. And I think that's a huge component, especially when we do drug research in socially isolated animals. We see the same behavior, that they rather choose to stay. They choose other activities when they are within their social setting, when they have other animals around them, rats, for example. They like to engage in they like to play, they like to have sex, they like to interact with other rats, social engagement, rather than just, inject themselves or expose themselves to drugs. So I think that makes a huge difference when we have this social equalizer, where people feel integrated, they're part of a larger social structure, instead of having social inequalities, social factors, socioeconomic factors that you pointed out.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And it's I like the way that you pointed out, like the value of as a policy to look at substance use as I'm inferring what you were saying here, but to look at substance use as a health issue, or a what's the word I'm looking for? Like a social health issue rather than a criminal issue. Now, crime is often associated with people who are deeply addicted and in socioeconomic situations where they're not able to sustain the economic resources that they need to get their substances. But that there's like a big difference in how we handle as a society addiction between a health crisis, like a social health care issue, and a criminal issue, because one comes with punishment and the other one comes with acknowledgement, hopefully acknowledgement, compassion, and support, which even in just discussing what's it called, the environmental enrichment for like rats, and they end up not wanting to use the substances and blah, 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 that is going to help people get off addiction. And then if they're off addiction, then all the crime stuff kind of resolves itself because they're no longer committing crimes to feed the addiction. Where if you just respond it with criminally, sure, you increase the sort of larger revenue of the private prison industrial complex in the United States, for example, but you're not exactly creating safer communities by any means. You're just moving the dangers elsewhere and then profiting off it, and then those dangers eventually come back into the community because those people get released and they're not necessarily rehabilitated. So larger social stuff that was not the intention. So maybe we'll slide back off this wonderful but nonetheless tangent topic.